everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, The Story Ain't Over. So today I am coming to you with my fave book series video. So you may have seen my favorite YA standalone books video, and so this is kind of on the similar vein. These are all my favorite YA book series. The reason I decided to do these videos is because I feel like I don't have a comprehensive list of my favorite books / book series, and I want you guys to know what they are. I think what really sparked this video was the fact that someone asked me if I liked a certain series and if I had ever read it, and I'm like, oh my god, like that's my favorite thing. How did you not know that? Oh yes, because I haven't told you. So this is my way of telling you about all of my favorite book series, especially the ones that I read before starting BookTube and that I haven't really gotten the chance to talk about on my channel. And as always, of course, these are just my favorites. If I didn't mention yours, that doesn't mean I didn't like it. It might just mean that I haven't read it yet. And of course, this list only takes into account the books that I have read and have come out up to the point that I am filming this video. So that's February 2019 for those of you watching in the future. So if I didn't include a book or series, it might mean that it hadn't come out yet when I filmed this. But enough disclaimers. Let's just get into my fave book series. I was looking at the list ahead of time, and it's just funny because most of these are fantasy and sci-fi. I feel like fantasy and sci-fi are most often in series just because there's like more world building to do, and I feel like my standalone video was full of a lot of contemporary, so that was just a little interesting, but I hope you enjoy. So here we go. These books are in no particular order, by the way, but I just decided to go in the order that I read them, sort of, in my life. I'm gonna start with like the earliest series that I read, and then the last one is gonna be the most recent fave that I have recently acquired. Okay, so the first book series that I absolutely love isn't actually YA, but I feel like it crosses into YA territory. It's technically a middle grade, but I feel like by the last book it kind of does cross into YA territory, so I'm just gonna mention it anyway because it's one of my favorite series anyway. So that is the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. This is one of my favorite things in the world. I absolutely loved these books when I was a kid. I read them like over and over and over again. You can just see by like the cracked spines. I especially loved the last two, which were my favorites in the series, which were more on the teen-ish side, but I read these when I was about 11, I think, 10 or 11. If you don't know what Percy Jackson is about, it's about this boy who finds out that he's half god, half mortal, and he's a demigod basically, and he has like magical powers, and he goes off to this summer camp with other kids like him who have demigod powers, and he goes on a quest to save his mom from this giant bull creature thing. It's weird, but it's so much fun. It's so funny. One of the things that I love about the series is its humor, and it's consistent throughout the whole series, and in the future series that Rick Riordan expands and spins off into. I will say that out of all the spin-offs and everything, the original series is still my favorite. I absolutely loved it. I think it's just the nostalgia value as well. But yes, the Percy Jackson and Olympians series, Lightning Thief, Sea of Monsters, Titan's Curse, Battle of the Labyrinth, and The Last Olympian. Alright, the next favorite series that I have here, it's an old favorite that like I was following as it came out. I was waiting patiently for every single book as it came out because I was so excited about it when I found out about it, and I just love all of the characters in this one. And that series is The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. So this is one of the Shadowhunters series. It's not the original one. The original one is the Mortal Instruments. That is not my favorite of the Shadowhunter series. It's actually this one. This series is set as kind of a prequel to the Mortal Instruments, but not really because it's set like pretty far in the past. It's set in the 1800s, and I just loved it because it's historical, but also because of all of the characters in this series. I feel like I really like them a lot more than the Mortal Instruments characters, and honestly, they just make my heart sing. I also just really liked the vibe of the story. I really liked seeing all the side characters too, and all the pairings, and it was great. And I also feel like this was a series that at the time was trying to flip over a very well-known trope, the love triangle trope, and it did such a great job of kind of turning it on its head, especially if you have read to the end. I will say out of the three of them, I think Clockwork Princess is my fave. Just look at that cover. Look how gorgeous that is. Jeez, guys. I remember getting this and thinking it was so beautiful and devouring it. Just so much nostalgia with this, guys. If you don't know about the Shadowhunters or Cassandra Clare novels, basically they follow these people. They're kind of like demon hunters who have angel blood in them. And in this series, the main character is Tessa Gray, and she finds out that she is a shapeshifter. So she is part downworlder, so she has demon blood in her, and she gets kind of swept up in the Shadowhunter world when they save her from these people who kidnapped her in London, but she's actually from America. And there are two other characters in this series, Will and Jem, and I absolutely love them. But Will is definitely my favorite and one of my, you know, very beloved book boyfriends. So love this series. If you didn't like Mortal Instruments as much, I would suggest trying this one, because I feel like people who didn't like Mortal Instruments as much always end up liking this one a little bit better, but that's just my opinion. Okay, the next series that I have here is one of my all-time favorites. Like, I don't feel like enough people talk about this series, and I feel like that's just such a tragedy. So that series is the Legend trilogy by Marie Lu. It's actually not a trilogy anymore, because she did announce that she's writing a fourth book, and it is coming out October 1st, I believe, of 2019. So I cannot wait for that one. It's called Rebel. I read this when it was just originally 3. She only recently released the information that she was doing a fourth book. But this is one of my favorite series in the world. I read it in high school, I believe, and I haven't reread it since then. And I remember just getting the first book, starting it, and devouring it. I sped through it so fast, and I've never like devoured a book that quickly. And I feel like all of Marie Lu's books are kind of like that for me. But this series came out around that time when dystopian was really huge in YA, and I feel like it got kind of thrown to the wayside and, like, you know, ignored because it was just another dystopian. But it was so good. It was so well done, and I honestly just thought it did so many things better than a lot of the other dystopians. It's very action-packed, it's very fast-paced, and the two main characters are just so incredible and amazing. It basically follows her two main characters, June and Day, and it takes place in like this futuristic version of America, and it's been split into the Republic and then the colonies. So Jude and Day live in the Republic, and basically in the Republic they have this system called the trial. So the way it works is that every kid at the age of like 10 or 11, I think, has to take the trial. So it involves like a physical test and a mental test and all these kinds of things to figure out your worth in society, basically. And based on your score in the trial, you will be allocated to a certain job or a certain pathway in life. So if you get a really high score, you can go on to a college or university and continue on to like a higher paying job and a better job. And then if you get a low score, you are put into like labor jobs and less intellectual jobs and like ones that are lower paying, etc. So June is kind of this rich girl from one of the richer sectors of the Republic, and she scored perfectly on the trial, and she enjoys all the privileges of that. And she's in like this police academy, and she's becoming a detective and all of these things. Whereas Day is this boy from this very poor sector in the Republic, and he failed the trial, which doesn't actually happen very often, but he failed it, and so he was cast out, and he finds himself on the streets and fending for himself. And so he makes himself into this hero. He openly opposes the government and does things against them, and so he's earned himself the name Day. His real name is actually Daniel, but he earns himself the name Day, and people kind of look up to him kind of like a hero. And one day when Day tries to rob this hospital for this plague cure, because he finds out that someone in his family has the plague, he gets caught by these police officers, and he gets framed for the murder of June's brother. And when June thinks that Day is like her brother's killer, she decides to make it her mission to come after Day and to catch him. And it's kind of these two going head to head, but, you know, realizing that there's so much more to each other's stories and to the whole kind of system that's bringing them down. I absolutely love this series. Not enough people talk about it because it is one of the older series of Marie Lu, and it came out during that like dystopian craze in YA, but it's honestly such a gem, and I absolutely love it. It's also really great because not only are these two characters like facing off in the beginning, but it also features like a really great romance later on and just some really interesting social questions. And the ending of this series, Champion, the last book in the series, is actually my favorite, and it always rips my heart out reading this and thinking about this book. I remember reading it and like finishing it and then just being a sobbing mess at the end. So it was very emotional, but it was really great. So I absolutely love the series. Definitely think you should try it out if you're looking for something action-packed, fast-paced, and really interesting in the questions that it considers. All right, my next favorite YA series that I want to mention here is another popular one. I feel like this one gets kind of mixed reviews. Some people really love it, some people don't really like it, but that series is the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. So these books are Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising. These are set in the same world as the Six of Crows duology in the Grisha verse created by Leigh Bardugo. And I feel like this is one of those series that people love to hate on, but I absolutely love it. I read it in high school. It was my favorite thing. I just really connected with the main character, Alina. Basically, the series takes place in a Russian-inspired fantasy world or country, and it follows our main character, Alina, who is a soldier in the army. And in this country called Ravka, there's this stretch of land that's complete darkness called the Unsea, or the Shadowfold, and it was created by this powerful man called the Darkling, who is one of the Grisha, so people with magical powers, and there's different kinds of Grisha and everything. And so one day when Alina is crossing the fold with her army regiment and with her best friend Mal, they get attacked by the creatures that live in the fold, and she basically discovers that she has magical powers. She has the ability to summon sunlight. So she is known as the Sun Summoner, and she's whisked off to the capital where there is the royal palace, and the palace that houses the second army full of Grisha, and there she trains to control her Grisha powers, and she starts to fall for the Darkling, and there's like this whole thing going on. This book also has a really great twist towards the end. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. A lot of you probably already know it, but I really love the series. I have a full book talk for it. You can go check that out. And of course, I cannot do a favorite book series video without mentioning my, one of my ultimate faves, and that is the Six of Crows duology. This series is like one of my favorite things in the world. I actually heard someone recently say that there might be a third book as well. Leigh Bardugo was thinking of writing a third book, so that's exciting. But I think as a duology, it just works really well. Just look at this. Those stained pages are gorgeous. But anyways, I love the covers for this series. And this series, honestly, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. I remember reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and then this came out a year after I read that series, and I was thinking about reading it, but I wasn't super sure. And I ended up going to a Leigh Bardugo signing for Six of Crows, and I heard so many people already raving about it with arcs and everything, and I just had an amazing experience at that signing. And then I read the book, and it was phenomenal. It's just a really great fantasy read. It has a great heist. It has a really great ensemble cast. All of them are dealing with their own kind of internal demons and things going on, but also interacting with each other and trying to achieve one goal together. But it was also interesting because the crew of kids in this series aren't stand-up citizens. They're all kind of flawed and making mistakes, and I just love that. I feel like there was a point in YA where we were expecting all of our characters to be, completely moral and perfect from the get-go, and these characters definitely were not. And they also weren't the chosen one either. That's another thing I loved about the series. All these characters were from the dregs of society. They were the people that no one cared about, that were fending for themselves, and I just loved that. I also love the diversity in this series. One of the amazing things about the series was that I finally got to see a South Asian main character, a Naj Gaffa, in this series, and that was incredible for me. And it also features one of my book boyfriends, and that is Kaz Brecker, the vile little human that he is, but I love him and I love this series. I feel like enough people rave about the series on BookTube, so I don't think I need to go on, but great series. Love, love, love it. The plot is just so tight and fabulous. Alright, the next series that I'm going to mention here is a sci-fi, and I actually own all 3 books, but I only have one of them here with me today because I lent them to a friend. But I absolutely love this series. It blew me away when I started it. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. I had heard some pretty good things about it, and that it was doing something very different than a lot of other books at the time, and I was just really intrigued by it, so I picked it up. And I'm so glad I did because it was such an awesome sci-fi read. And that is the Illuminate Files by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. So this is the second book, Gemina. I don't have the first one with me, or the third one, but the first one's called Illuminate, and then the third one is Obsidio. This series is basically the coolest thing on the planet. It's a sci-fi series. It takes place hundreds of years in the future, and in a different galaxy on different planets and everything. But the really cool thing about this series is that it's told in a very unique format. So it's not just novel format, but it's told in IMs and messages and reports and security footage and a lot of different formats, interviews, schematics, that kind of thing. And it was just so cool because no one had done something like that before. And so I remember reading Illuminate and being blown away because it was just so cool. I also recommend reading this through the audiobooks because they're great. They feature a full cast and you get kind of like the sound effects from like the space stations and like the different spaceships and like the explosions and all of that. Another thing I love about the series is like the really crazy plot. It's very fast-paced, very action-packed. The plot just kind of like tumbles forward, especially towards like the second half of every book. And there's a lot of like death tolls and there's a lot of like crazy things happening. There's a psychotic AI character. There are like hackers and criminals and just so many things involved, and I absolutely love this series. Like, I did not expect to love it as much as I did, but I did. And this is actually my favorite one out of the three just because I like the two main characters in this one a little bit more than the other ones, but otherwise absolutely love the series as a whole. Definitely recommend this if you're looking for something action-packed, fast-paced, full of a lot of really funny lines. Like this series is hilarious. That's one of the things that I loved about it as well. So definitely recommend it. All right, this next series is also a sci-fi, and it's another one of those cases where I own both books, but I lent the second one to a friend, so I don't have it with me. But that series is Warcross. So the Warcross duology. The second book is called Wildcard. I will put the picture here. I absolutely love this series. Like, I talk about it every other second. I absolutely love sci-fi in general, so I really like this. But this series is also by Marie Lu, the author of the Legend series, which I mentioned earlier, which I absolutely love. And so when I found out that this was a thing, I got super excited. But the thing that really drew me in was the whole concept of this book. So basically it follows our main character, Amika Chen, who is this hacker who is hired by this billionaire game developer named Hideo Tanaka to find this like hacker slash person attacking his game called Warcross. So Warcross is like this global phenomenon that has like taken over people's lives. It uses virtual reality technology, so people wear like these contacts or like glasses to like log into the world. It's basically like a glorified version of Capture the Flag, and they can play these games with people or like go into different worlds and do things, and it's super cool. And it also features like augmented reality, so like you can have virtual reality aspects overlain on your like real surroundings. Both books kind of work like a mystery. You're trying to figure out what's really going on. It also features a really great romance, especially the first book. I will say the first book is a lot lighter and happier than the second book, which gets pretty dark and like intense at some points, but they are both really fast-paced and action-packed and just are absolutely phenomenal. I think Marie Lu is just really good at writing fast-paced, action-packed things. And I also just really liked Amika Chen as a character as well. Even if she wasn't always confident, she was always very capable and always fought with her all. And there's also some really great side characters in this story. Amika ends up on this like Warcross team called the Phoenix Riders, and I absolutely love everyone on the team. So that was great too. And I love the main guy in this book, Hideo Tanaka. He's another book boyfriend that I love. They are great. I love the romance in this. So definitely recommend this if you are looking for something like pretty light and fun, especially this book, and also something like really fun and action-packed and fast-paced, and also just like the idea of the virtual reality. If you're into that, definitely recommend this. I know a lot of people didn't really like the second book, Wildcard, that much or as much as the first one, but I personally really loved it. I thought it wrapped up the series really well and answered a lot of questions that we had in Warcross, but also grappled with a lot of really interesting themes and like what it means to be human. And I just thought that it expanded beyond what like the simple story of Warcross. All right, the next favorite series that I have here is another sci-fi. As you can tell, I really like sci-fi, but this is one that I recently got into, not super recently, but like about a year ago, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I was so blown away by this series. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, and it just had a lot more to it than I thought it was going to. But this is actually also one of the only series on this list that isn't finished, so I'm still waiting for the third book to come out. I think at the end of this year, I'm hoping, but that series is The Arc of Scythe by Neil Shusterman. So they are Scythe and Thunderhead. I absolutely love this series. I remember reading Neil Shusterman books when I was a kid, and they were kind of creepy and weird, and I wasn't really into them, but this series was just, oh, so amazing. This series takes place hundreds of years into the future when humanity has basically conquered like death and disease and basically anything that hinders human life, and so people are also able to reset their lives and their bodies back. So someone could essentially live until like 100 and then reset their body back to like 20 years old and then live another life and continue living. And so everyone everyone is literally immortal and won't die unless they choose to. And so to curb population growth, there are these people called the Sides, who are like this order or organization that is tasked with killing people. So they will randomly select people in their region to kill, and there's like hundreds of these Sides, and they have their own kind of bureaucracy and everything, and they just make sure that humanity doesn't go like beyond its limits. And the world is also run by this AI called the Thunderhead, which is like the cloud of all human knowledge that coalesce into this like kind of being that runs everything, that looks through security cameras and things and watches the whole world and makes sure it runs perfectly. And it's just this really interesting world. And so the first book follows our two main characters, Citra and Rowan, who are these two teens who get selected by this Scythe to be his apprentice. And so he says that, you know, only one of them will become a Scythe at the end, but he's going to apprentice both of them, and they'll just see which one gets to be the Scythe. The thing I really love about the series is the world, but also like all of the like moral questions that it grapples with. It tackles the topic of like what it means to be human, you know, what it means if you live forever. So definitely recommend this if you are thinking of reading it. All right, this next one is another one that I recently discovered, and by recent I mean like a year ago, but I was just so blown away because I had heard people talk about the series but like hadn't really paid much attention to it, and I didn't really expect to like it as much as I did going in, and I absolutely loved it. These characters are just so compelling and interesting, and I was just so invested in their stories by like the third book. This is also another series that is not finished, so the fourth one is coming out probably at the end of this year or next year, but that series is the Ember in the Ashes Quartet. So the first book is An Ember in the Ashes, the second book is Torch Against the Night, and the third book, which recently came out, is Reaper at the Gates. I absolutely love this series. I love the main characters, Elias and Laya. They are just so compelling, and I loved the first book especially just because of the like intense character growth that they go through. Like they have a really amazing arc. But basically this is a fantasy series that's kind of inspired by like the Roman Empire, but also by a lot of like things like Jinn and Efrits and that kind of thing. And I thought it was just so interesting, and the way that like the magical elements work in this series is really interesting because it kind of like slowly weaves itself in the way that it does in kind of like Game of Thrones. I do feel like this series has a very strong Game of Thrones feel to it just because of the way like a lot of people die, and like there's some really cruel villains in this as well. I feel like there's some really great villains in this series, and I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with them. So I definitely recommend this if you are looking for a new series. I think the strongest thing about this series is the characters, but it's also a really fast-paced story, and the plot really drives forward, so it's definitely great for that as well. All right, and the last book on this favorite book series list is one that I recently read at the end of 2018 and absolutely loved. It took my breath away, and I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. I feel like this is a common running theme. Like a lot of my favorite series are the ones that like take me by surprise, and I absolutely love that. So I only own the first book in this series, but that is the Strange the Dreamer duology. So the first book is Strange the Dreamer, the second one is Muse of Nightmares. This book totally took me by surprise. Like a lot of people had recommended it to me and said it was like a really beautiful fantasy, but like I had never really heard much else about it or what it was actually about, and like there was nothing to really draw me in. So I decided to pick it up on a whim, and I'm so glad I did. It is so beautifully written. Laini Taylor's writing is just so lush and gorgeous, but also all the characters in this series are just so amazing. I loved like all of them, and they were so endearing, and even the ones that were kind of like the bad guys, I like understood. Like every character was just so nuanced and had so many sides to them, and I just loved reading this. Another thing that I loved about this series is just the way that it grapples with a lot of intense and dark themes. It seems like a pretty light and fluffy fantasy read when you start it, but like it gets so much more intense as you go along and as you learn so many more things about the world. I don't even want to like try explaining like the premise of this book because I feel like it's one of those books that you need to go in knowing nothing and you'll just be blown away. But I absolutely love this series. It's phenomenal, and I definitely think it's a fantasy with a lot more substance than some of the other like high fantasies that I've read, so I absolutely loved it. Okay, so those are all my favorite YA book series. It's a very long list and I'm very tired after filming all of that and holding all of those books. But I had a great time talking about all of my faves today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments down below if any of these are your favorite series or if there are some that I didn't mention. Let me know what your favorites are. I'd love to hear it. And as I said, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just like my favorites up until February 2019. So I will definitely add more as I read more. So I'll probably do a updated version of this video at some point in the future. But thank you so much for watching, and please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!